Hi everyone!
Hello and warmly welcome to this webinar about character strengths and positive psychology. My name is Netta Lehtonen.
And my name is Pauliina Piippo, and we're so happy to have you with us here today in our first ever webinar in English. Very excited about this today.
Definitely, and also very excited about the topic itself. Because we actually believe, and I really think that if we wouldn't have gotten to know our strengths better and spot them in each other and others, we possibly wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that too. And today you are also gonna be able to dive even deeper into strengths and especially character strengths that are researched a lot in positive psychology. But before we do that, we would love to hear from you guys there in the other end. So please feel free to write down one of your strengths, the first one that comes to your mind in this chat window. And we would love to hear about your strengths and what kind of strengths we have present there today.
So whatever you come to think of when you think about strengths and yourself, what is one strength that you have? Please, you can try the chat and write the strength there, and we can see what types of strengths we come to think of. Pauliina, do you want to mention one of yours?
Well, one strength I could mention at this point is, well, actually love is one of my top strengths of the character strength, and I've been doing this test that we're going to tell you about later as well. I've done it quite a few times, and almost every time I think love has been number one. So that is definitely one strength that I try to use in my work as well. And I hope you can maybe spot some of it as well.
Thank you. And here we have some others as well. So there's humor, honesty, Rilla says curiosity, good listener, openness.
Wow. So here we can already see that these are all very amazing, beautiful strengths, and all different ones as well. So all of us have our own strengths, and it's amazing that we have these different strengths in different people as well.
Definitely. And yeah, like you see, there are so different ones. Here comes imagination and adaptability, and none of them are really better than the others. It's just like all strengths are beautiful, and you have your unique own combination of them.
But no worries if you have had some trouble coming up with a strength, because we're going to go through today different ways of spotting strengths in yourself and also in other people.
Yes. And actually, even according to research, it's pretty common that we don't recognize our strengths. But when it comes to positive psychology and the research that's being done there, we can see that by recognizing and being able to utilize our own strengths, we can actually feel more meaning, we can reach our goals better. It affects like so many things, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that soon. But like we mentioned, we wouldn't be here without knowing our strengths and really be using those. And that has to do with actually like the whole path that we have been doing as entrepreneurs, that we've been able to, like, in the best possible way, to try to use our strengths to reach our goals and basically do whatever we are doing, and do it in the way that we are like ourselves in the best possible way, and therefore being able to reach the goals that we set. Of course, not always, but very, very often.
Yeah,
and much more likely.
Yes, and also strengths can be there to support you if you are facing struggle, and that we're also going to talk about more today.
Exactly. But we were thinking about this, that it actually, and we want to say this in the very beginning, that it does take some work. Like things like this, when you stop, okay, we have now about an hour to talk about strengths, but that's like a really, really, really tiny surface that we are able to touch here. So some people, I mean, I think this is like a lifelong learning process to get to know your strengths. And actually, when we were doing these materials, even though we've been talking and teaching about strengths for, 5.5 years now, I discovered one of my strengths that I hadn't really been like thinking about. And it's pretty common that we don't maybe stop and think about like, what are our strengths, what are my values, what are my goals. So maybe you have your own like stories regarding that. We maybe be following some outside motivation, or maybe we like read a book and start living our lives kind of according to it, or the tips that the book is giving, like whatever it is. Maybe your parents have told you something, and then you just kind of go forward and don't necessarily stop to view your strengths and think of what are actually my values, what brings me meaning, what are my strengths. And these kind of topics are ones that we research in positive psychology.
Yes, and especially these character strengths are very much related to your values and who you are at your core. So we are going to explore all of these topics today with you guys. And feel free to ask any questions. If you have any questions, any comments, please use the chat, and we are happy to answer your questions during this whole time. And we have reserved some time at the end for those as well.
And now we will put on our material, and hopefully you can all see it now.
This beautiful landscape from Finland, a very summery landscape here.
So warmly welcome once again the ones who have joined us later to talk about character strengths and positive psychology in tonight's webinar.
So why do we want to talk about strengths, and why should you be interested in your strengths? And here we already talked about this a little bit, a few points about that, but a few more ideas on why we should focus on strengths and why it is good for us. And the first one here is the negativity bias. And we humans have this kind of built-in bias to see and notice more of those things that are negative than of those things that are positive. So actually this is really natural to us. So there I would also try to be self-compassionate about it, that it's normal that you might spot more of your weaknesses and more of the things that you should be working on and fixing than of those things that are actually good. And noticing your strengths and kind of building on your strengths. So that is one reason that we want to focus on strengths today, to be able to see more of what is good around you and in yourself and others as well.
Yeah, and one other thing is that bad is often stronger than good. So not only do we see it, like it's more common to focus on those things, like what is going wrong, what is bad. But then when we, for example, think about emotions, we don't like to talk about negative emotion, but the unpleasant emotions, which are also really important, but unfortunately, they often take like a greater space in a way. So you feel more strongly the unpleasant emotions than the positive ones, even though quite often we might actually experience more positive emotions or somehow more like neutral emotions throughout the day. So that's also one reason why it's really good to focus on what are the strengths and how to use those.
And the third point here is languishing and disengagement at work, which seems to be quite a big problem these days, and especially through this pandemic. This state of languishing, I think it's even growing into a bigger and bigger problem. And for example, Adam Grant wrote a really interesting article about this in the New York Times a while ago, and he was saying that languishing might be the dominant emotion of 2021, which is quite, I can relate to that, because languishing means that you're not really suffering from any mental health issue, but you're not thriving, you're not flourishing either. So you're kind of there in the middle, and all the days might seem a little bit gray and similar to one another, and day after day you maybe stay at your home office and you don't have much variety in your days, and it starts to wear you down after a while. So I think many of you might relate to this kind of a feeling during this pandemic and all these difficult times. So here again, noticing your strengths and finding ways to use them in new ways also in this situation that we're living through might be a very good idea and help you to strengthen your well-being.
And even if you couldn't relate to these things that we have now mentioned, it is extremely likely that you still have some blind spots. So even though you would have been like spending time and thinking about what are your strengths, and you would recognize those. Even like I thought about my own story, that when we were making these materials, I discovered totally new things, or saw like one of my strengths in a new light, and understood finally why people, for example, have been giving me feedback of that specific strength. So I had a huge blind spot. It's something that like you have a strength, but you don't necessarily see it, or you might see that you have a strength, but you don't really like pay attention of how you are using it and how you can utilize it in the best way possible. So no matter what your situation is, you are in the right spot right now, being here talking about this with us today.
And a few words about Joyless. And Joyless might be completely new to you, but this is our company. We are a training and consultancy company representing the third wave of positive psychology. So this means that we, first of all, let me mention that this second wave of positive psychology, and that we also like to take into consideration the difficult emotions and difficult experiences you might have in your life and how they can affect your well-being and flourishing. But then also this third wave of positive psychology, and this is a really interesting new kind of direction in positive psychology, thinking about how we can take all of these learnings even further, and not just on the individual level, but also on a collective level, to different cultures, to everyone, so that everyone could benefit from these amazing teachings and scientific findings.
Definitely. Thank you. And Joyless story began 5.5 years ago, like I mentioned earlier, and since then we've become Finland's most popular trainer in positive psychology. So we have different kind of courses, and then we also, for example, do workshops and coaching in companies.
So in Finnish, we already have several training options available, and now we are taking our first steps in English as well. So we are really happy to have you here with us today.
And a little bit more about ourselves. So my name is Netta Lehtonen.
And my name is Pauliina Piippo.
And we are the founders of Joyless. And we have both studied a Master's of Applied Positive Psychology. We're both also coaches. And I was going to say, when Pauliina was talking about this, that this is, we're now taking the first steps toward the English market. So I'm actually pretty excited about the fact that we have studied our Masters in English, and it's been like a lot of work to translate everything into Finnish, which is not one of the easiest languages in the world. So it's nice to be able to use English, since most of the research is done in that language as well. So thank you for joining us on this path. And now I would also like to introduce myself from this strength point of view. So I mentioned that I figured out something totally new about myself, or maybe it's something that I kind of already knew, but like I said, there are these blind spots that we don't see. And I was thinking one really good way, and this is like a tip for you, to study your strengths, so to speak, is to ask some of your colleagues, friends, family that, hey, if you think about me, what are the, for example, 3 strengths that you come to think of? And I did this a few years ago. And quite often people would write there that like wisdom, or you're wise. And for some reason, I wasn't really like paying attention to that, because that wasn't one of the things that I would have thought of. Or like Pauliina mentioned, love, here's appreciation of beauty and excellence. These kind of strengths come like more easily, or I see them better in myself. But now when we were doing these materials, I was thinking, I was like writing that, okay, perspective is one of the strengths I have. And that has to do with wisdom. And I realized that that is what everybody was writing about, because I love to see different kind of perspectives. When somebody has a conversation with me, I don't usually like give advice in a way that, okay, you know, this is because of this thing, or we talk about another other person. I don't like to be like saying that, oh yeah, that's how she or he is like. I'm like, but what if we look at the bigger perspective? And I realized, yeah, that's my strength, and that's what they spotted.
That is wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. And well, I'm Paulina, and well, I have also a few of my strengths here, but I also wanted to share, we were talking earlier about that sometimes you might start following somebody else's path instead of actually stopping to think of what are your strengths and what are your values. And as we mentioned, these strengths are really a lot connected or strongly connected to your values. And this actually happened to me before we started our company. I was on a very different path. You can see here, I'm also a Master of Science in Technology. So I kind of started following the path of my parents. First, I wanted to become a doctor, and my mom is a doctor, but I didn't get in to study that area. So then I went to a technical university, and maybe you might guess what my father is doing or what he has been studying. He has been studying in the same technical university. So I kind of did that, started following maybe more outside expectations than actually pausing and really thinking about what are my strengths and what are my values and what do I want to do with my life. But happily, we did this around the world trip already, was it 10 years ago almost? And we had a lot of time to think about that question. And through that, I discovered positive psychology, and actually both of us did. And then we went on to study and founded our company. But today, I'm so happy that I'm able to use my strengths even better than before in my work and in my life as well, in other areas of my life as well. Yeah.
And this made me think of that it doesn't mean that you have to take a trip somewhere or that you have to change your career or anything like that, because now both of us would also say that knowing these strengths, we could more easily find ways to use them in the work that we were doing before. I was in the financial banking world, and back then I wouldn't really have thought of using love or appreciation of beauty and wonder there, but now I would know how, and these are things we will talk about.
So what are we going to go through today? First of all, we are going to talk about strengths, and more specifically character strengths that have been studied in positive psychology quite a lot. So we're going to talk about what they are and what are their benefits.
Yeah, we're going to help you to identify your own strengths, but also talk about strength spotting in others. And like Paulina mentioned, this tool that you can measure your strengths with, we will share that to you later, so you can also go and take this measurement and find out that what are the answers for you.
And if you want to share any thoughts of this webinar, feel free to do that on social media. For example, you can use this hashtag Joyla and the handle Joylafi, and we're happy to hear your thoughts as well. So first of all, we have a question for you guys, because the topic of this webinar is character strengths and positive psychology. So we would like to know how familiar you are, or if you are familiar with positive psychology. So we put up a poll for you guys there. You can answer if you are familiar, somewhat familiar with it, or not yet familiar.
So you should be able to see this poll now, and at least some of you have already started answering it. And currently it looks like yes, and somewhat are the most common answers. Thank you. Now the answers are coming in, and there are also a few of you who haven't or aren't really familiar with positive psychology yet. So good. We will also very briefly go through what it is. What are we talking about when we talk about positive psychology? Thank you for your answers. It seems like most of you are answering that you are somewhat familiar A few are maybe very familiar and then some not yet, but you will be very soon. Thank you.
So if we talk about positive psychology, we could introduce it through these beautiful pictures here and through thinking about languishing that I already talked about and comparing that to flourishing. So I would say more than 20 years ago, when positive psychology was founded, before that, psychology and specifically clinical psychology had focused quite a lot on this languishing area. So if you have some kind of a mental health issue, you're depressed, you have anxiety, something else, psychology was very much focused on how we can treat these kinds of illnesses and how we can heal them, which is a very, very important area, and of course, still today, very important.
And we also want to show you this other type of way of looking at what positive psychology is. And so first we have the pictures. Now you can see still languishing and flourishing on this kind of a scale from -10 to +10. But this is a very, very simplistic way of looking at the topic, but it's also a very good way to explain it. So we like to use this kind of scale. So here we see that, okay, languishing is -10, then we have 0, where it's like a normal state in a way, and then +10 is flourishing. And like you see here on the previous slide, flourishing has the flowers and is, so to speak, the positive side. And that is what positive psychology started focusing on. We knew very little actually about the positive side, like what is good in people, what is good about life, what is happiness, what can we learn from people who experience a lot of meaning. So they started, when positive psychology was founded, to focus on what can we learn from this plus side. And actually, based on studies, most of us are here close to the normal state, so the 0 state. And we can also see from studies that does not mean, like, the fact that we are not on the minus side, that we are here in 0, doesn't mean that we are doing well. It doesn't mean that we are experiencing flourishing and this kind of well-being. So around 70 to 80%, depending on studies, are here around this normal state. So there's quite a lot to do, and also a lot of interesting areas to figure out that how can we take steps toward flourishing.
Mm-hmm. And as Netta said, this is quite a simplistic model, and new research is also in positive psychology researching topics such as strengths and engagement and meaning and these kinds of things, also in adversity. So also how these kinds of topics of positive psychology can even help us, for example, be more resilient.
And I have to add to what I was talking about, that's also a very simplistic view that a person would just be, for example, like, okay, here you are in this 0 state. And because we all know that we might be like, maybe put ourselves on a different place when it comes to work and when it comes to family and different kinds of situations and areas of life. But yeah, this is one way to explain it if somebody asks, what is positive psychology?
So now you know.
Hopefully, yeah. And here is one definition. So positive psychology is the study of human well-being, strengths, resources, and how to promote them.
That is actually a really important point, that we also focus on researching ways to actually kind of take these things and learnings into practice, how to promote well-being, and on an individual level and also on a more larger scale.
And this is what strengths are a very good tool for. Here you see Joyless frame of flourishing. So this is a model which describes this kind of holistic well-being, flourishing. And this is based on Martin Seligman's PERMA model, which maybe some of you can be familiar of, but we have also made a little bit of changes and added this 6th area here, which is vitality. But so you see that in this frame of flourishing, we have 6 different areas, and the first one is positivity. So here, when we include this into this model, we mean all emotions. not only positive emotions, because like Paulina mentioned, the second and this third wave of positive psychology are also emphasizing a lot that how can, for example, these unpleasant emotions be very, very important to our flourishing and like very meaningful to us and our well-being. So this is about emotional intelligence, but then we also know, like we mentioned, this negativity bias. There had been very little research on positive emotions, and they have so many benefits. So how can we prioritize positivity? It doesn't mean that we neglect the unpleasant side of the emotions, but how can we prioritize it to get those benefits and take those steps toward flourishing?
And the second area of this model is engagement. So this has a lot to do with strengths, for example, because when you use your strengths, you can experience up to 6 times more engagement. And I think that is really impressive, an impressive finding. But if you think about engagement, maybe you kind of relate to this feeling when you're really kind of sucked into what you're doing and you might be familiar with the state of flow. So this is one type of engagement where you're really enjoying what you're doing and time flies by, and you might be like achieving things very easily and it feels very good as well. So through using your strengths, you can experience much more engagement in your life.
Then we have, according to the psychological research, the most important area for our flourishing, but it also often can be one of the most challenging areas, and that is relationships. And here we mean these kind of authentic, positive, and meaningful connections. And strengths are also, like we talked about the strength spotting, so strengths they are very social, and they can be really like help you to build and maintain good relationships.
And the next area is meaning, and this has to do with meaningful life and work as well. And actually, well, maybe did you mention that the relationship was the most important one of these? According to some studies, meaning might be the second most important one. And strengths, as we mentioned before, are also related to this area, because when you use your strengths, this can also help you experience more meaning.
And then we have accomplishment, which has to do with motivation, our goals, resilience. And if we think about this specific area, here's actually also one of our favorite tools, which is self-compassion. And that I think is related to strengths as well. But strengths are a very, very good way, like I mentioned earlier, to like use let's say this in a different way. When you use your strengths, that's a very good way to reach your goals and have motivation.
And last but not least, we have vitality in this model. And Netta mentioned that this is something that we have added upon this original model. And this original model a little bit maybe lacked this kind of mind-body connection and taking into consideration how connected they are to each other and how our mind and body affect each other all the time. So we wanted to add this to our model. And this vitality part has to do with exactly that. So how you eat, how you sleep, how you exercise, your connection with your body, and also a positive health, which is a really interesting area in positive psychology as well. And also has to do with strengths, because strengths can help you kind of keep up your health and your vitality as well.
So this is the frame, and today we are focusing on engagement and strength specifically. But like we mentioned, they have to do with this whole frame. And when we talk about strengths, like a very, again, simple way of explaining what we mean is that they are something you're good at and you enjoy doing. But if we look at one, there are so many, but one of the scientific definitions, it is that strengths are patterns of thinking, feeling, or behaving that when exercised will excite, engage, and energize you, and allow, because of these things, you to perform at an optimum level. And I want to mention these 3 things again. So when exercised, when you're using your strengths, they will excite you, they will engage you, and give you energy. And this is something that we definitely experience when we are able to use our strengths. And here is a picture of a situation, or this kind of situation where we get to do that. It really brings up these 3 different things.
Yeah, often we might feel, or I might feel, and I'm sure you relate to that, like really energized after, for example, this kind of a webinar where we can use our strengths and share these things with you guys. So now we want to stop at our first mind gym, and we like to use this term of mind gym and get you to go to the mind gym as well during this webinar, because it's a little bit like if you want to take care of your physical health, you might go to the gym, or you might go for a run, or whatever is your type of exercise. But in the same way, you can and you should, or it's really a good, I would recommend you to take care of your mental health as well through exercising your mind at the mind gym. And the first exercise is that you can think or write down 3 of your own strengths. So some of you already mentioned some of your beautiful strengths here in the chat, but now you can write them. You can write them in the chat as well if you want, or on a piece of paper, or on your computer, for example. And then think of your friends' 3 strengths. So choose a friend, a loved one, or a co-worker, or anyone, and think of 3 of their strengths as well.
So you can just think about these, write them down, or share them in the chat. But we will give you a tiny moment for doing this. And like I mentioned earlier, one good way is to ask your friends what they see, or like what are the strengths they see in you. So now that you're thinking of one of your friends or loved ones or colleagues' strengths, maybe you want to ask them if they would like you to share these findings.
And if you're having a difficult time coming up with these strengths, don't worry. As we mentioned before, actually 1/3 of us only, according to some research, identify our own strengths. So this might be really difficult to get anything on the piece of paper, or any strengths in your mind. But no worries, we will help you to identify them later on during this webinar.
And this makes me think about the fact that that is why it's so really, really meaningful and important that these kind of things are studied, and also that this kind of like strength language is developed and it's spreading out there, because now some newer research shows that it might be that 2/3 of us recognize our strengths. So there's definitely like a change going on, but it obviously depends on a lot of things, if you recognize them or not. I'm going to start a poll here at the same time. Oh, good. Thank you, Paul. There's already a few. Curiosity, openness, and fairness.
Thank you for sharing. Lovely strengths.
Yes, very good ones, like they all are. But I'm going to start here, Paul, asking you if it's easier for you to recognize your own strengths or your friends. So whenever you are ready, you can fill that out. It's going to be interesting to see what you think.
Yeah, so feel free to add your answer. And often, I think when we ask this question, people might find it a little bit easier to identify other people's strengths, but of course it depends, always depends. And both are good answers as well, because it's very good if you can recognize your own strengths, but of course also if you can recognize other people's strengths, because that's maybe one of the greatest gifts you can give someone, to share their strengths with them.
And Yasmin is also sharing here, brave, honest, relentless. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. It's always such a pleasure to hear what kind of strengths you have.
So now we have some answers coming into our poll, and I hope I didn't lead you on there when I mentioned this, but it looks like quite many of you found it easier to identify your friends' strengths than your own strengths.
Yeah, so at the moment, it looks like 81% of you who are answering are saying that it's easier to recognize your friends' strengths. Thanks for the answers. And like we said earlier, it doesn't matter what the answer is, you're still in the right place, because we will talk both about recognizing your own strengths and also spotting them in others.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this is quite common that it is easier to recognize other people's strengths. And it's especially, I think, in this Finnish culture that we are used to, and when we work with companies and so on, it's even pretty often that like it's hard to recognize a single strength in yourself, but then it might be really easy to recognize them in your colleague or friends.
So now that we have stopped and thought about these beautiful strengths that you have, I would like to do a short kind of visualization exercise with you. So if it feels comfortable for you, you can close your eyes, or then you can just relax your gaze and concentrate on this exercise for a while. So now you can bring to your mind one of these strengths that you maybe wrote down in this task that we had, or one of your own strengths that comes to your mind in this moment. And you can think about how this strength has helped you in your past. Maybe it has helped you achieve your goals. It has been there in your relationships, maybe helping you to connect with other people. And you can think about all these different ways that this strength is serving you every day. And now imagine that for the next month, you will not be able to use this strength at all. So, for example, if your strength is curiosity, you will not be able to ask any new questions or learn any new things, get to know any new people, taste any foods you haven't tasted before, or do anything that has to do with your strength. So what would it feel like, and what would it look like if for the next month you would not be able to use your strength at all? And you can sit with this feeling for just a little moment. Unfortunately, this is just a small exercise, so now you can start letting go of this picture and invite your strength back into your life again. And we will end this exercise, so when you feel comfortable, you can join us here again.
Wow, to me that was not a very, very pleasant feeling, thinking of not being able to, here Mira says, I would feel lost. Thank you for sharing. And if we think that strengths are things, and especially these kind of character strengths that we will go into soon, are things that kind of make us who we are, and then suddenly we wouldn't be able to use them. It's like you are explaining it very well. makes total sense that it would make you feel lost. And now that we have explained what positive psychology is, this might feel like a little bit of a weird and not so positive exercise, but actually these have also been studied, that this kind of like reminder of how something is really important to you and like an important part of your well-being can actually help to enhance it.
And we were doing this exercise a while ago, and actually some people also answered that it felt a little bit relieving. And this might have to do with if you're overusing your strength. We are going to talk about that later. But for example, for me, I was talking about love, and sometimes if I'm overusing and giving love to other people and not myself, then it might even feel relieving to take a vacation from my strength at some point. So there are many perspectives to this task as well.
Yeah, but that's a good point, that if it feels relieving, that it's usually like a message telling that it's not in balance. I wasn't able to imagine my life without bravery. Thanks for sharing, Yasmini. And it's a really good exercise to actually realize how important your strengths are. Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Thanks for doing it with us. Now, we would like to ask you that if you think about developing yourself, growing as a person, growing with the field of work you're doing, do you think it's better to focus on strengths or weaknesses? And now I mean like developing your strengths or developing your weaknesses. And
so we have one more poll for you guys. Is it better to focus on developing weaknesses or developing strengths? And this is an interesting one to hear your thoughts as well.
And something that has been researched, so we're kind of doing our own little study here now. Is it going to have the similar kind of answer that the science is saying at the moment? Thanks, the replies are coming on here again, and yeah, it actually looks pretty much.
We have a good audience today.
Yeah, so at the moment it looks like 30% are answering that it's better to focus on the weaknesses, and 70% or 69 at the moment says focus on strengths. Okay, and now weaknesses are getting a few more answers here, so 35-64. Thank you. When this has been asked in some at least one specific study that I come to think of, the answer was actually like this. It was opposite. 60% answered that it would be better to focus on weaknesses. That if we want to develop, if we want to grow, we should focus on what are our weaknesses and how can we kind of get rid of them? How can we turn them into strengths? And so this is a very typical answer. And when we look at studies, the studies would actually suggest something a little bit different. But before we go into that, I want to mention that even though we're talking about positive psychology and we're focusing on strengths, it doesn't mean that let's totally forget, like in the same way I mentioned the uncomfortable feelings are important. Also, let's not forget totally about the weaknesses. So studies are showing that, well, there are many different ones, but they're actually pretty interesting ones, and maybe we'll share an example. But if we think of percentages, we could focus around 80% on the strengths and then 20 on the weaknesses. And often when you like talk with different organizations or people, it might look a little bit different. So it might look like maybe we focus 20% on the strengths, but then 80% on the weaknesses. So this is something maybe you can remember from this webinar, that let's change that, let's turn that around. So a little bit more focus on the strengths, but we don't have to forget about the weaknesses.
And yeah, I could share this kind of a funny, I think, study that has been done showing this same thing actually. So it was done on these bowlers. So they were not professional, they were amateur bowlers. And there was a group of people who were bowling, and they were divided in two halves. So half of them were told, for the next week, keep a diary on your weaknesses. What are you doing wrong? What could you fix? and really focusing on developing through fixing your weaknesses. And the other half was told, for the next week, keep a diary of your strengths and write down what you're good at and how you can focus on that even more. So after this, the researchers went back to them and kind of noticed that both groups had developed. But when they were compared, they found that the group that focused on strengths had developed twice as much as the weakness group, or 100% more than the weakness group. So I know this is kind of a funny setting, but similar results have been found in, for example, studies in organizations, that focusing on your strengths, well, like we said in this definition of strengths, focusing on your strengths can help you reach your optimal level or your optimal performance.
And we could talk so much about this topic. We're not going to go into the neurology today or things like this, but the findings show that it's much faster. The progress is faster, and we probably feel better when we focus on the strengths. But like I mentioned, we don't have to forget about the weaknesses. But here, Judith, for example, is saying that I think to balance, we need to focus on both. Yeah, good point. And here was a comment about, hold on, did it already disappear here? I think other people support my weaknesses, for example. I was going to ask Anna-Lena if you want to explain this in more detail, but one thing that I came to think of this is that, for example, if we have a team or we have like a pair of people, so let's say my greatest strength is not to be super organized. I'm more like a little bit creative person all around. So then I could like see that, okay, Paulina, you're very organized.
Not always.
No, but we could build a pair in a way that, okay, she has something, a strength that I don't have. So then I don't even like need to focus that much on building that weakness of mine, because we together can build something great. Or that if I'm just thinking about myself and there's like many weaknesses that I have, so how can I use the strengths I have to kind of like what would the word be in English, to like not like overpower or overgo the weakness, but to like what's it called,
I know that, yeah.
Well, sorry. I hope you get the point. So to
kind of use it instead of
exactly,
yeah, your weakness. Take a strength and kind of
like draw on that strength, so that I don't have to even focus on the weakness. Like if I'm not very good at something, is there something or a strength of mine that I can still use in a situation to kind of become better at it? So there are different ways that we can use the strengths instead of having to dig into the weaknesses in the same way. But in some situations, it is totally needed, or it can be really good, or if you are motivated in it, to develop your weaknesses.
Yeah, as Judith here said, that I think we need balance and focus on both. That's a very good point. So sometimes we really need to focus on the weaknesses as well, but we can also frame that through strengths, and we're going to talk about overusing and underusing your strengths. So that's also kind of a little bit different way of thinking about weaknesses. So yeah, let's leave that to later on, but somebody might actually be maybe overusing a strength, and that might seem like a weakness, but then you can frame it in another way. But I will give an example of that later on.
And thank you, Judith. So overshadow in English. Thanks.
Thank you.
And Anna-Lena also replied to my question. So you meant teamwork. Thank you. So I understood your answer correctly. Exactly. That's a really good point.
And actually, Judith was also saying this, a little bit same thing that I was thinking of, that I would rather think of weaknesses of mine as undeveloped traits, unused, but could be gold there. Exactly that point. They might be underused strengths or traits.
Yeah, and that's one of the best things that strengths give us, because we get this kind of a language that we can then see that, okay, like maybe a weakness is actually a strength, it's just not used enough, or I have this blind spot, so I don't even see it.
So now we're gonna dig deeper into these character strengths that have been studied a lot in positive psychology. And soon we're gonna show you these 24 character strengths that are grouped under 6
virtues.
Thank you. So through these pictures, we want to open up this a little bit more. First of all, we could think of our character strengths as this kind of a fountain inside us, and from this fountain springs all this flourishing and well-being in our lives. And these, as you noticed in this exercise we were doing, that your strengths can really help you reach your goals and do many things in your life. Or we could think of our strengths as these paths towards these virtues. So they are ways that we can reach and kind of live out these virtues. And we can also think about these character strengths as seeds inside of us. So all of us have 24 seeds inside us, and the character strengths, there are 24 of them. But depending on which seeds get the most sunlight, which are watered and taken care of, different character strengths start developing and growing. So they are all as great and as appreciated, but they might look very different. So we might have a beautiful oak tree or a beautiful rose garden or different kinds of plants growing or strengths growing in your life. And this is actually, these metaphors were created by Ryan Niemiec, who is working at the VIA Character Center and has been doing a lot of research on this area.
Yeah, I think especially this one with the 24 seeds that we all have is a very, very beautiful way of explaining it. So, character strengths specifically, what are they? First of all, they are one of the most important and most researched topics within positive psychology. So like I mentioned, back in the day, we actually didn't know much about this, like positive side or the plus side, what is good in us people. So Martin Seligman and colleagues, Martin Seligman is one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, which, by the way, was founded in 1998. And then they thought about this fact that, okay, we have quite huge books about different kind of mental illnesses, different things that can be, so to speak, wrong in us or problems, but we don't know much about these virtues or strengths or anything like this. So they launched this Values in Action, which is also called VIA Character Strengths project in 2004. And this was a huge project. They had, I can't think of the specific number, but it was more than 50 researchers doing this, and not all within psychology, but there was also from history, religion, culture, languages, different kinds of things. And they especially read a lot of different kind of books and did interviews around the world. So this has been quite well studied, and based on this, they did this classification system that Paulina mentioned. There are the 24 character strengths, which all are divided under these 6 different virtues.
Yeah, and all of these character strengths are kind of underlying features of virtuous thinking and kind of help you develop good character as well. And they are personality traits with moral dimensions in them as well, and they are self-justified and widely valued and worldwide valued as well. As Netta mentioned, that these have been researched around the world.
And one reason why they are valued is that, like you see in the name, it's called Values in Action. So they have to do with this kind of, well, they can be very related actually to your own values, and they have to do with this kind of morally valued values. And of course, virtues are usually very widely valued as well. So you will soon see how the language and the different strengths look like, and maybe understand this even better.
First, we want to mention a few benefits of strengths, so benefits of recognizing and using your strengths. First of all, they can help you strengthen your self-confidence, and this is one that I think both of us really relate to. They can help you develop your capability, your self-esteem, and your self-acceptance. They can also help you with learning and success and achieving important things. And as I already mentioned, they can help you experience more engagement, up to 6 times more engagement.
And that is huge, because if you think of like the business world, organizations always trying to find different ways to engage their employees, and then we think that, okay, like the fact that they would recognize and be able to some ways use their strengths could mean that they can experience up to 6 times more engagement. That's seriously huge. And we don't have to think about organizations, just like our own lives. Like, okay, if I can experience six times more engagements, that is a pretty significant thing. I have to, at this point, read Debbie's comment here. Thank you so much for sharing this, because when Paulina mentioned the self-confidence, I think this has hugely to do with that. So Debbie said that some people use your weaknesses against you, so it makes sense to run with the strengths. For example, I would get teased for my shyness, but on the other hand, my sensitivity helps understand and communicate with other quiet people. So beautifully said, and this sensitivity, which is such a beautiful strength. Like, I'm seriously getting goosebumps now when I'm saying it. I'm very sensitive myself, and like kind of like recognizing that and owning that. Isn't that like a really, really beautiful and great way to feel more self-confidence? Because I remember a lot of times when sensitivity, for example, has felt like something that I've been ashamed of. And then when I'm learned that, hey, that's my strength, now I'm able to stand here and talk English in front of you guys.
Thank you for sharing, Debbie.
Thank you.
And here we have still a few other benefits as well. So strengths are also related to performance. And this was actually a study that was done in a work setting. So there were these team members and their bosses that had a discussion, this kind of discussion that you have every once in a while, like every quarter or so, depending on the company, about how to develop yourself and so on. So some of these bosses, or what would be a better word? Managers, leaders, they were focusing on strengths in these discussions. And that led up to, I think it was a 36% performance kind of
enhancement
through having a discussion where your boss sits down with you and talks with you about how you could use your strengths even more and what your strengths are, compared to a discussion where they were focusing on the weaknesses here again. And in that case, the performance actually lowered, and that was by 24% or something. So if you think about the difference here, it's huge. And this was actually a study done with quite a lot of people as well. So even though it's just one study, there were, I think, something like 20,000 participants in that study. So it was a very, very interesting study.
Yeah, and once again, so huge. So imagine just by talking in like is it called development conversation or something like that, they received 36% better performance. That's like seriously huge. Yeah, and there were more than 20,000 people. Yeah.
And still, we have here more happiness and more energy that we already mentioned, that you can feel really energized after using your strengths. And that's also a good way to spot your strengths. Like if you have this burst of energy, you might think, okay, have I just been using maybe one of my strengths here? And with strength teams, where you try to take into consideration the different strengths of team members and give them tasks according to that, Also, research has found lower turnover and higher productivity in these kinds of teams.
Thanks, Paulina. These are great benefits, and the list could be so much longer. Maybe a couple that is worth mentioning are life satisfaction, job satisfaction, and then the experience of meaning in life that we've already mentioned earlier. So really, really great benefits. And resilience, which is not here, but it helps us to face adversity, to helps us to face challenges and change.
So now we're going to go into this classification in just a short while. But first we want to mention a few criteria, because Netta already talked about this huge extensive research work behind this classification of strengths. And all of these strengths meet certain criteria, and here are a few of them. So first of all, they are worldwide, and we already talked about that these have been studied around the world in different cultures. So for example, well, this research started in the US, but then they have been studying this, for example, in the Maasai tribe in Africa, and I think in Inuits as well. So in all different kinds of cultures around the world.
And another thing is that they are internally motivating. So maybe because there are different types of strengths. Now we talk about character strength, but then there are like talents and resources, different kind of ways. And some of them we want to use to read something. So for example, I like to do something so that use one of my talents or strengths so that I will receive like feedback or thank you or money or whatever it is. But these character strengths are internally motivating, and that means that we might even like just want to do it just because it feels motivating and good, and we don't need something for using our strengths.
And it's also inspiring to see when somebody else uses their strengths, and we're going to talk about that even more later. But usually you might see if somebody is really kind of at their best. It's really inspiring to see that as well.
And we will share you this tool where you can measure your strengths. So these are also measurable.
And the most important one of these is that all of these are open to development. So as we already talked about, focusing on developing your strengths, all of these can be developed and strengthened and enhanced in your life as well. So I think we're going to go to this classification.
Yeah, now you will see them all. So here we go. You have the 6 different virtues and 24 strengths under these. And maybe some of you are already familiar with this, and maybe some of you are seeing this for the first time. And before we read this through, I still want to mention that here, the list of the criteria is longer. So actually, for example, one thing, if you see that maybe something is missing, one of the criteria is also that they need to really be able to be separated from each other. So there could be a few strengths that could be added here, but then it's seen that like they go into something that is already here. And that's what might be one reason why you don't see it here. Or then the fact, like Paulina mentioned, that they are not worldwide. So in Finland, we could, for example, add here this sisu, which is like a Finnish type of resilience, perseverance. But not everybody in the whole world would add that specific one, so it's not here. So first we have the virtue of wisdom, which are this type of like the strengths of the head, the mind. And here we have strengths. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt myself now, because please, when we're going through this, you can have this like open curiosity to see that which ones of these do you recognize? Which one of these do you think are your strengths? So the first strength of wisdom, creativity. Then we have curiosity, judgment, love of learning, and perspective. And then we have the virtue of courage, which are these strengths of the heart. And here we have bravery. I remember somebody mentioning that as one of your strengths. We have honesty, perseverance, and test. Then we have the virtue of humanity, which are strengths that have to do with others. And here we have kindness, we have love, and social intelligence.
And then here in the bottom row, we have, first of all, strengths of temperance. So these are strengths of the self. And these include forgiveness, humility, prudence, and self-regulation. And then we have the strengths of justice. And these could be called maybe strengths that have to do with larger groups and these types of strengths.
Like community.
Community strengths, thank you. And here we have fairness, leadership, and teamwork. And last but not least, we have strengths of transcendence that maybe create connection to the wider world around you. And these are appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope, humor, and spirituality.
And I almost have this feeling that, wow, like huge words in here. So here you might now see that a lot of these might have to do with values. And like I mentioned, the name is values in action. So strengths are a bit different because values can be like these kind of things that we are thinking about and that we experience to be the most important things in life, but we don't necessarily use those in action. So strengths are then again a way of doing that. So what I mentioned earlier is that like we always think that one of the most important thing with this classification is that we get the language, because I don't know how many times somebody, for example, has said to us that like, oh wow, and this might be like an artist working with painting or taking photographs or whatever it is, saying that I didn't know that appreciation of beauty or excellence, for example, would be like a character strength. And there might have been like outside pressure of this kind of thing that, oh, you know, this kind of art or creativity is not like a real job or whatever it has been. And then you suddenly see that, wow, like this is who I am, this is my strength. Or this is like but this is actually an example that has happened like many times that I've heard of, but then just thinking of ourselves, like we, for example, both have this now talking about this appreciation of beauty and excellence. And when I was working in a bank, I would have had like, I had never heard of this. I had no idea like what to do with this. But strengths help us to get into flow and this feel engagement. So when we find ways to doing so for example, appreciation of beauty and excellence, if me and Paulina want to get into a flow, it's much better that we go out to the nature to have a meeting than that we sit and like look at a white wall or whatever it is. Or I used to be pretty messy, so taking care of my workspace and like having a nice flower there or just like my home in general. Seriously, I can feel how much I get to use my strength. I value my strength, and then I experience flow more. Do you want to add some example or something that you come to think of when it comes to the language? And
yeah, well, that was a really good point. That first of all, having this language helps us. For example, we would now ask you to do this task to identify your own strengths or somebody else's strength. It would probably be much easier when you have this kind of a vocabulary for it. But yeah, I'm thinking if I would add some example. Well, I was thinking about this love strength again here, that as well, when I was still working as an IT consultant in quite a different world, it was really weird actually when I did this test for the first time, and there it was as my first strength, and I was really I didn't realize how I could use this strength in my work. But now when I have stopped to kind of explore it and find different ways, and today I feel I am using this strength quite a lot in my work when I take these learnings of positive psychology forward, and with people that I interact with and so on, I kind of try to grab these moments where I can use my strength in my work, but also in my personal life as well.
Thank you. So yeah, look at these words, do the test, which we'll share later, and think of what you like find and experience, and if you can recognize those and how you can use them. But we will talk a little bit more about that later. One more thing that I'd like to mention when it comes to this language is that we are so pleased, and it feels so meaningful that these specific strengths are nowadays around the world actually taken. Of course, it depends on the country if it's still introduced and how much, but like already introduced to kids in kindergartens, daycare, schools, and so on. So it's amazing to see how they learn to use this kind of language and spot strengths in each other.
Yeah, and one thing that we wanted to share with you here is also this beautiful project in Finland that was created a few years ago by some researchers who have been studying these strengths with kids in schools specifically. So they created this thing called a positive CV. And the idea is that because kids in a certain age, for example, maybe in the 9th grade or something, when you're kind of in your teenage years, it might be quite hard to talk about strengths and what you're good at. And it might be a little bit feel scary to kind of talk about these things or tell other people what your own strengths are. So they wanted to develop this positive CV tool that will help teachers and parents and the kids specifically to kind of list their strengths. And then they would have this positive CV that would follow them and help them kind of, help them realize their strengths and
introduce themselves from this strengths perspective. That's also something that you can try, like have a conversation with somebody when you're introducing yourself. Do it through their strengths. Explain who you are.
And one more tip is that this tool that we're going to introduce, there is also a version for younger children or for youth. So if you have some younger people at home or in your close circle around you, it would be also maybe a good idea to do that test together with them.
Okay, so now you've seen the 24 strengths. So we want to leave you with this kind of 3-step model also by Ryan Niemiec, who is the manager or the leader of the VIA Institute. And these 3 steps are aware, explore, and apply. And we're going to leave you with this mind gym, so you can maybe take a picture of this exercise here and do it later on. So first of all, we warmly recommend you to take this VIA survey, and that is a completely free survey available in many, many different languages, and it might be a good idea to do it in your own mother tongue, because that's maybe the easiest way to kind of do these kinds of tests. So go to the address viacharacter.org, and maybe some of our team members could add it there in the chat as well. And from there, the test takes maybe 15 minutes or something. And as a result, you will get all these 24 character strengths in your specific order. And the top 5 of them are called your signature strengths. So these are the strengths that are maybe the most come naturally to you and are most you. And thank you, Juha added this link there in the chat, so warmly recommend you to go and check that out. And there you can also find this version for younger people. And so when you have done the test and you get these results, and they're, like Paulina said, you have the 5 first, it depends a little bit, like 3 to 5 first are your signature strengths. So then you can go and do a little exploring. So you can ask yourself, for example, these kind of questions that we have put in this mind gym. So how have you used these strengths in the past? How do you use them in your everyday life? In what kind of situations? How will your strengths help you realize the best possible future? Like, how do you utilize them to, if you remember that scientific definition, there was this, that you can reach this optimal performance by using your strengths. So how do these strengths help you to be the best version of yourself? And then and this is a really important phase, which actually often is skipped, but please try to do a little bit of exploring. And then when you have done this, it is good to start applying it. So one of these kind of positive psychology interventions, which means that it's a scientific research tool, is that you come up with new ways to use your signature strengths for a week. So let's say you have the strength of curiosity there as one of your signature strengths. Then you can either like focus on that one strength and find different ways to use it for 1 week, or you can also pick like a couple of your signature strengths and then use them throughout that week. But this is a really good exercise. I warmly recommend you to try it out. And I was going to say that I can promise. I hope I can promise. At least I really think that you will have fun with it, and you will feel engaged and motivated, because you get to do who you are. And when you have taken this test, it might be that to some of us, like me and Paulina, it happened like those, 8 years ago that we did this the first time, that you also might be getting this negativity bias in real life action, and look at the like least or the, what is it called, like the bottom 5 strengths, instead of the ones that are your signature strengths, and be like, oh, why is this, whatever it is that you have down there, like I have self-regulation has been at least sometimes pretty low there, and then I've been like, oh, I wish this was higher up. But this is how our mind often works. It doesn't have to be that way. But then remember that there's a thing called negativity bias, and we have all of those 24 strengths, but the first ones might be the ones that really describe who you are. But I still want to say that this is just one test. So that's why we warmly recommend you to also ask your friends, ask your colleagues, your family, and just do this exercise, like explore them yourself. But we also have to say, I think, that both of us can recognize the strengths that we have, we get through this test, and they are pretty accurate. But different life situations can also change your strengths. So it's good to do this test, I like to say, every year.
Yeah, that was one point I also wanted to add, that this is not a test that when you do it, okay, that's your result and that's who you are and this is never going to change. No, because they are open for development, and different life situations might affect them and so on. So I like to do it as well, like once in a year, or then if there is some bigger thing happening in my life, I might do it even more often to see what happens there in my strengths as well.
And like somebody mentioned beautifully in one of the comments, also with strengths, like with basically everything in life, it's all about the balance. So balance is something that we really want to mention when we talk about strengths. Every single strength has also their kind of like shadow side or downside, and we can underperform, underuse or overuse every single strength. So for example, if we think of humor, well, maybe somebody could argue differently, but maybe there's not always a place for humor. So then I might be using the strength of humor in a place where it's not really like a very good idea. So it's good to try to find this happy medium, how to use the strength appropriately in what kind of situation. And that's why the exploration phase is really needed. So not only to start using them, but also exploring, when is it in balance? How do I use it? And by doing this, you can find the balance and experience flow.
And that's also a good way to kind of spot your strengths again. If you feel really in flow, maybe you can think, okay, what strength was I using and in what way? Because then probably it has been in the right balance as well.
Good point.
But we also wanted to mention that character strengths have been studied in setbacks as well, and in these kind of tougher, harder situations. And character strengths can support us in two ways. So they can support us on the path of well-being, but they can also support us to get through adversity better. And some studies have found that character strengths can alleviate different kinds of problems and suffering. And here are some of them mentioned, such as depression, anxiety, work stress, hopelessness, alcohol use, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So if we think about this kind of this scale that we had in the beginning from the minus side to the plus side, actually the character strengths can also help us in the middle and maybe on this minus side as well. And they are related to development of resilience. So through expressing and what's the word? Using your strengths, you can enhance and strengthen your resilience.
And one kind of exercise or tip that we would like to leave you when it comes to this is this kind of a, I think this is also from Ryan Nemick, and he calls it the mindful break, and there are different variations. But we like to do this that we have tried out and experienced to be good. That is that you can do like we did earlier today. You like take a moment where you close your eyes, or you just focus on your breath. You like slow down, calm down for a little bit, even if it's like 10 seconds. So just sit there or stand, whatever you're doing, breathe in, breathe out, and bring or draw upon one character strength. So let's say you are, for example, headed to a stressful meeting, or you are meeting with some friend of yours, and you're maybe stressed right now, or whatever it is you're experiencing, and then you think that you maybe want to, like in this situation, I want to call upon the strength of love or humor, whatever it is you need or want in that situation that might be a little challenging. You can do this exercise, and at least I really enjoy doing it, even if it's like a tough situation. It makes it feel a little bit brighter.
That's a really beautiful exercise. And then still at the end, we want to share a few words about strength spotting. So seeing and spotting strengths in other people and also sharing them with the people around you. So as we mentioned before, when somebody uses their strength, we might kind of notice it and see that, okay, now this person is really at their best, and they might kind of have their eyes wide open and be really, their voice might start, what's that called? The word, like have different tones in it, and maybe their body language is telling you that, okay, now this person really seems to be in the zone of strength.
Like Paulina right now.
So we want to leave you with strength feedback and a way of giving strength feedback as well. And that is a great way to show appreciation of others and also kind of give these gifts to other people around you. So we have a few steps here mentioned, and the first one is to recognize this strength. And here you can see some of the cues, but of course it also depends on the strength, what kind of strength it is. But first of all, if you notice this some kind of strength, you should name the strength that you are seeing and praise the other person for trying. So maybe not only for what they have achieved, but also for the process of what they're trying to accomplish, because this has to do with a growth mindset. And say why you appreciate this strength and why what it brings to the situation. So, for example, in our team, we have a person that has a great strength of curiosity and is really good at asking questions, and also judgment, looking at things from different angles. And she asks these really great questions. So one feedback that, for example, I could be giving her is, okay, hey, thank you for using this amazing strength of curiosity during our meeting, because this helped us to have a much better conversation of this topic, and we maybe reached a better solution through it. So we're naming the strength, and we're also saying why we appreciate it and praising the trying and the using of the strength. But we should also be aware of possible problems and kind of strengths colliding with each other, because of course these strengths are different and sometimes they might not work very well together. Like Netta mentioned here, that sometimes maybe humor can be overused, or all of these strengths can be overused.
Like going back to this example of curiosity, then the meeting wouldn't necessarily get anywhere if one person or multiple person or people are just asking questions like constantly. So then it would be overuse, and then you could
you could use the same formula to kind of say that, okay, I really appreciate your strength of curiosity, but in this moment it was maybe we didn't have enough time to go, and this was dragged out a little too much, this conversation, so maybe you could have used some other strength in this specific situation to kind of use that one instead of the strength of curiosity.
Bring in another strength as well.
So we want to leave you with this this exercise of giving strength feedback as well, and I really encourage you to try it out. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. In the beginning, it might feel a little bit hard. And one tip is also to use this really kind of concrete examples. So not like, okay, in general you do this and that, but use these specific examples. In this situation, you used this strength and that led to this and that. And this is why I appreciate it, because then it's easier to kind of take in that for the receiver. So before your next meeting or encounter with other people, you can first of all put on this kind of strength spotting glasses and remind yourself that, okay, now I'm looking for the good in others and trying to find these strengths. And you can also maybe have this character strength classification there close to you, and pay attention to these kinds of situations when other people feel like or seem like they are at their best. And use the strength classification to notice what strengths they were using, and finally express that and tell them about it.
So it could, for example, be that, hey, sister, thank you for always being there for me, like always supporting me, that it really makes me feel loved.
Right.
This kind of thing, like whatever it is. And like Paulina said, that we want to recommend and encourage you to use this. You could even, after this webinar, if you want, send somebody a little text message. And actually, when we give this kind of positive feedback, it usually just starts spreading more and more. So we're kind of sharing the good, and often the giver gets a lot of well-being benefits as well. All right. Well, this last quote here is often referred to as being said by Albert Einstein, but we don't really know. It's a little bit, nobody knows who has actually said it, but it's so good that we wanted to include it in any case. So everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it is stupid. Right, pretty heavy, but so good. And I, at least, have judged myself the way that this fish is being judged in this specific scenario. Maybe you recognize some situations like this in your life. So for me, humor is not a strength that comes like very high up. And I was always thinking that, like, in order to be a good performer, in order to be able to be, anyone who gives lectures or does anything to get the audience's attention, you need to be one that makes people laugh and like be a funny, humorous person. And therefore, I didn't want to do it at all. I didn't see it as a possibility because I was so focused on my strengths. I was so focused on that I'm not the one who is like making jokes and making people laugh. Then I luckily became familiar with character strengths. I found these things like appreciation of beauty and wonder and love and perspective, whatever they are. And I built the performances that I'm making, the lectures that I'm giving, in the way that I can use my strengths. And I loved doing it. It's like such a great way because I'm not thinking of what am I not good enough in, what is the weakness. I'm just focusing on what can I do. And the maybe most beautiful part is that in the feedback that we get, people are spotting our strengths. And maybe somebody is missing the humor, maybe not, but also because I'm focusing on my strengths, the humor is usually there as well. It's just that I'm not like focusing on that. That's my weakness. So what is this kind of situation for you? Are your weaknesses stopping you from doing something? And if you don't recognize this in yourself, there are most likely people around you who this is true to, especially like you mentioned youth and teenagers who are in a very vulnerable state. So we encourage you to dig into your strengths, to explore, and to find ways to compensate. That was one of the words that I was, yes, also one of the words, yeah, to compensate your weaknesses with your strengths.
So now we have reached the end of this webinar, and we are so happy that we have been able to share all of these thoughts and things with you guys. But now we still have a few minutes. If you have any questions, please write them down in the chat and we are happy to answer them.
And thank you for being so active and sharing your thoughts and ideas. And here you have time to ask the questions. We will be taking them if you have any, but we want to also summarize this before you disappear. So remember this Ryan Niemiec's model of aware, explore, and apply. So the 3 steps: go and figure out what your strengths are, then explore how you use them and utilize them, apply them. And also maybe can be added that maintain them as well.
And also remember the balance. All of the strengths, they can be overused, they can be underused, and also the balance between strengths and weaknesses. But as we mentioned, focus more on the strengths, and then when needed, you can also take a look at your weaknesses.
And start spotting the strengths in others. Even when you watch a movie, you can maybe see that, okay, what kind of strengths are these characters using? And give this kind of strength-based feedback, like we heard from the performance example from the team conversations with the managers. It really makes us feel better and perform better as well.
And at the end, we want to leave you with one thought, so you can maybe think of what could be one good thing that was worth coming for in this webinar, or one thing that you're going to take with you from this webinar. It might be to go, that you want to go and do this, take the VI survey, or you want to start spotting strengths in others, or whatever it may be. But think of one thing. And thank you for your beautiful words, Paul and Debbie and everyone. Very nice to read all of your comments.
Thank you so much for your kind words. We're happy if we were able to serve you tonight with or today, wherever you are in the world, with our strengths, and obviously a very meaningful and great topic.
And still, at the end, we want to share with you some great news about the future. So we are going to continue with these webinars in English as well. And in the fall, we're going to have 3 different topics. We're going to talk about self-compassion and positive psychology, which is one of our favorite topics of all time, and also one that many, many people really relate to. And we're going to talk about leadership and positive psychology. There are so many different things and tools and ways to use positive psychology in leadership. And also we're going to discuss relationships and positive psychology. So really interesting topics coming up.
Great topics. We're already excited about those as well. And like I said, we could talk about this for many days, so there's a lot of topics, and hopefully we will see you on our courses in the future too, like somebody like Paul, I think Paul mentioned here, and maybe we'll meet again.
And one comment to MC who says that you were late. No worries, you're gonna get a replay of this webinar later on, so you will be able to watch it again.
And if you have any questions later on, please send us feedback, questions, whatever you have on your mind. We love to answer those and hear from you. And we're just really grateful that you were a part of this webinar. Thank you for being interested in character strengths. We truly believe that by utilizing these kind of topics and bringing them forward together, we can make this world a little bit better. So thanks for doing it with us.
Thank you. And maybe all of you are going to spread the words of strength forward from here on.
Have a good day, morning, night, and we'll see you later.
See you later.
Bye-bye.